Welcome to Veterans Voices. I'm your host, Joshua Zebley, with my co-host, Elena Kim.
Hi, Josh.
Today, we'll be doing the best of 2024 Veterans Voices. Today, we're going to take a look at some of our best shows from 2024. The first show, 2024, was January, the PACT Act. That show had the most views of the entire year. The reason we picked that is because we were still getting people calling our office, veterans calling, and asking questions about the PACT Act, so we felt the need to do another show about the PACT Act.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I'm super excited to walk down this memory lane with you, Josh. But yeah, so I wasn't a part of this show, but it was super important because August 2023, Congress passed this huge piece of legislation, right? The PACT Act. Mm-hmm. And that was amazing, but it led to a ton of confusion for our veterans. I'm sure you saw a lot of them in your office. And the great thing about this show was that you brought in 2 county veteran service officers, or at least 2 staff members. And then you also brought in a special attorney who deals with fighting for veterans benefits and having those subject matter experts on the show to really help unpack this legislation and explain it to our veterans, I think was amazing. So I wish I could have been a part of that show, but I think you guys did a great job.
Well, let's take a look at it now.
3 key points to the PACT Act that I would like to point out is that what it has done is that it expanded the Agent Orange presumptive area to include Thailand and Guam. When it comes to Thailand, previously to the PACT Act, we had to place our veterans on the perimeter of the bases to get them the same presumptive conditions as the other veterans that are exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam. However, with the passage of the PACT Act, every veteran who served in Thailand now receives those same presumptive benefits, and as well as Guam. Guam stored Agent Orange for a long period of time, all the way up until 1980. And what that does is just opens up a whole new era for those veterans there. What it did for our current generation of veterans is that all those veterans that served in the Gulf and the Middle East, they now have a whole list of conditions that they are presumptive to. And what it also did is it made it much more difficult for the VA to easily dismiss toxic exposure claims for all veterans, regardless of what era they served in.
Thank you, David. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Ryan?
No, Dave hit the nail on the head. It definitely expanded the areas for Agent Orange for those veterans that served in those other locations besides in-country Vietnam to allow them to file claims for toxic exposure for benefits that were way overdue.
One of the most important things about the PACT Act is it actually expanded toxic exposure to really the whole world, believe it or not. Because a little known part of the PACT Act is what they call toxic exposure risk activity. We use TERRA for short. And what that is any veteran from any time period that served anywhere in the world, including the continental United States, could, if they have an illness that they feel is linked to a toxic exposure of any type, they can let VA know and say, hey, I've got cancer, I've got lung conditions, I have these sicknesses, and I think it might have been, I might have been exposed to something. Could have been a situation where perhaps they were in Thailand, as David said, but they weren't in Thailand during the time period that is covered by the PACT Act. Those veterans now, when they let VA know, I feel like I'm sick, I feel like I was exposed to something, VA is now required by the PACT Act to investigate that, investigate toxic exposures beyond those that are on the list or presumptive. So that expands those exposures to things like, if they were on a ship, they were probably exposed to asbestos. If they were a mechanic, an aircraft mechanic, helicopter mechanic, vehicle mechanic, they were exposed to all kinds of particular toxins like cleaning fluids, things like that. If they worked around airplanes, even if they were a mechanic, they might have been exposed to fuels, exhaust, all these different things that there's really a lot of science out there that links these to all kinds of different diseases, not just those on the presumptive list. So the PACT Act has really opened up potential benefits to all veterans from all time periods. That's a very exciting part of it.
In February, in a show focused on the greatest generation, we interviewed World War II veteran Chuck Kohler. I actually went to his home and got to interview him. This is a piece of American history that I will personally never forget. According to him, he's the first sailor, first military member to get shrapnel dropped on him as part of World War II at Pearl Harbor on December 7th.
Yeah, and what I really love about this clip, Josh, is that it's true to the title of our show, Veterans Voices. You're interviewing a real combat veteran here, and I'm really jealous that you got to do this.
Let's take a look. Mr. Kohler, it's an honor to speak with you. Can you tell me about your experience the day of the attack?
Well, I was in the duty section assigned the 0800 to 1200 security watch at Aerial Patrol Squadron VP-23's hangar, Building 54, located on the harbor inlet end of Naval Air Station Ford Island, right in the center of Pearl Harbor, the bullseye of Pearl Harbor. I heard the sound of an approaching aircraft, but that's not unusual. We're a Naval Air Station. Airplanes come and go, but not usually on a Sunday and not that early in the morning. Suddenly and simultaneously, there was a tremendous roar. Bomb fragments, explosion debris, and window glass came crashing into the back of my head, ears, neck, and onto my shoulders. Something like that can kind of upset even your best laid plans for the day. It did mine. It took me a little while to get my train of thought back on track and to kind of recover from the concussion of that nearby bomb blast. And when I did, I'm thinking it's one of our friendly air group pilots, hot dogging, crashed. I'm going to go down and see if I could be of some help. When I got on the lower level, went out through the narrow opening, left at that big hangar door, the sound of another airplane. I looked up and here comes another airplane, a steep power dive, and I'm seeing what's looking like blinking or flashing lights on the front, and I'm hearing strange popping and buzzing sounds all about me. I don't recognize either of them for what they were. Later I was told that what I thought were blinking or flashing lights was the machine gun muzzle flashes, and those popping, buzzing, and whizzing sounds that I was hearing was those machine gun bullets striking and passing through the structure of a PBY twin-engine patrol bomber was parked right near to where I was standing. Then they would ricochet off the concrete apron on which it was parked or off the steel hangar door right behind it. But since I didn't recognize them for what they were, I didn't consider them any danger to me. My interest was with a big old bomb hanging there on the bottom of the fuselage between the fixed landing gear on that diving Bell dive bomber. Suddenly that bomb released, it wobbled as it began to fall. The airplane began to pull out of its dive. By the time it had completed its dive and was in level flight, I don't think it was more than 150 feet over my head. It's then that I first saw and recognized that big round red insignia there on the bottom of the wing. That, and the fact that he has just dropped a bomb, has convinced me that, oh, these are not the friendly fellows I thought they might be. I turned around, hurried back inside the hangar, hoping I could find someone with the key to the ammo shack. All of our guns and ammunition was locked up, and I wanted to get a gun and some ammo and get at these guys. But as I come in the front door of the hangar, the other few that I was on duty with that morning were heading out the back door. Someone, I suppose the duty officer, spots me and says, "Hey, you, follow me." I went after him. I thought, oh boy, he's the duty officer here. It's his responsibility to put up a defense. But I was very disappointed when he went out the back door of Building 54, because instead of turning to his right and leading everybody down to the ammo shack to get guns and ammunition so we could put up a defense, he instead turned to his right, went out, jumped in an on-filled construction ditch. Everybody followed, jumped in after him. Since I'm coming in the front door, when they're going out the back door, I'm about the last guy into that ditch. I hit the bottom of that ditch, got myself stabilized, looked up. I'm looking right at a guy there in his white uniform. The work uniform was blue dungaree trousers and a blue chambray work shirt. But he was in his dress white uniform as though he was going into Honolulu, going to church or something. Never did find out why he was in his white uniform, but I'm so thankful that he was, because there on the left sleeve of that uniform was a petty officer's rating badge, and I recognized the winged round cannonball, the insignia of an aviation ordnanceman. You the duty ordnanceman, yeah. You got a key for the ammo shack, yeah. Well, let's go get guns and ammo and shoot these blankety blanks, you know. So I hadn't much more than hit the bottom of that ditch, and I and that ordnanceman were on our way up out of there. There's somebody, I suppose the duty officer calls out, "Get back in the ditch, get back in the ditch." I don't want to be in that ditch. We're military men. We should be putting up a defense. We shouldn't be here in this ditch. Besides, I know this is the beginning of that war that they've been talking about and we've been preparing for. And I'm from a very proud family. And I damn well know that if I'm going to lose my life in this battle or any other battle of this war, I would want my family and my country to know that I died fighting, not hiding. Man, I couldn't wait on this other guy to get his train of thoughts back together. I just reached over, slid the lock forward, threw the breech open, fed the end of the belt into the rolling mechanism, slammed the breech shut, grabbed the charging pin, pulled it back and let it go. Bam, we get around in the chamber. Shoot, I shouted, and he pulled the trigger. I guess he was one of those guys that thought with a machine gun, you don't have to aim, you just point in general direction and fire away. Because I stood there and watched those tracer bullets fly off harmlessly through empty space, somewhere near to where that airplane had once been. Back there on the farm where I was raised in Minnesota, you become a hunter and a gatherer really early in life. And you also better become a good shot, because being a good shot would oftentimes mean the difference of whether you would or would not have food on the table. I said, "Let me get the next one." He let that gun down. I grabbed it, brought up the firing position just as I did. Here comes another one of those airplanes. Boy, I got a bead and a lead. I continued to lead and squeeze the trigger. I continued leading and firing. All the while, that guy came down, finished his power dive, pulled out in a level flight path just overhead. I watched those tracer bullets fly through the air. It looked like every one of them went right into that big round opening on that old air-cooled radial engine dive bomber, then stitch to stitch right down the bottom of the fuselage. Now, some of you know and remember that following each one of those tracer bullets, there were 4 regular bullets. Another tracer, 4 more regular bullets. So I know here and I know here that did damage to that aircraft. But you're not going to be watching him. He's going away. He's no longer a threat. If you want to survive, you damn well better be looking for the next one's coming at you. I bring that gun back down. I'm looking for another one in the power dive. I don't see him. Well, there's one. There's one out over the channel, maybe 2 city blocks away. He's not in a power dive, but a steep banking and descending left turn is the way he's lining up to make a machine gun run on this area. Because he's in that banking turn, I can see the cockpit. It's about 6 or 8 feet behind the front of that airplane. I figure at that distance and at that speed, if I use the very front of that airplane as my aiming point, I'm going to get some rounds into the fuselage, maybe even into the cockpit. And believe you me, if you can get a couple of 50 caliber slugs bouncing around inside that cockpit with that pilot, you're going to give him something else to think about other than coming back and machine gunning your area a second time.
In March, we did a show on military sexual trauma. There's a lot of silence surrounding this issue, and what I thought was most important about this show was that we were speaking out and giving voice to the issue.
Yeah, MST is one of those topics that's extremely difficult to talk about, but if we don't do it, we're not doing our job as folks who want to help veterans. And it's, as we could see, the numbers are staggering.
Men and women.
Men and women.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure we're doing what we need to do to help these veterans.
Absolutely. Let's take a look at this clip.
It might start off as inappropriate comments or in the guise of joking or teasing. So just kind of realizing for people that that's kind of the beginning of the continuum, and then it can lead all the way to inappropriate touching and groping, and then sexual assault, rape. Yeah.
That's such a good point. Yeah.
And related to what you're saying too, there's often this grooming pattern. So it can start off very small. It's just a comment here and there, and you brush it off, and maybe I'm being too sensitive. And then it escalates once the person who's potentially hurting you feels that they have that ability to do so.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, Dr. Nevins. I mean, being a Army veteran myself, when you're brand new to the military, you're seeking to fit in. So, you know, if there is an inappropriate comment or an inappropriate experience, you might be questioning yourself at first and wondering, you know, am I taking this a little too seriously? You're trying to fit in with that culture, and you're trying to, as our survivor mentioned in the video, you're trying to fit in and do a good job, right? That's something that we hear a lot from our veterans is they're very idealistic. They joined the military because they wanted to help other people.
So thank you all for joining us. You guys made me think, is there any numbers, any percentages that we think that has actually come forward? And I know it's low, that's just general knowledge, but why do you think so many stay so silent?
Yeah, so in terms of the VA statistics, so a national study was done. It's about 1 in 3 women report that they've experienced MST, and about 1 in 50 male veterans report MST. And I think the reporting is so low for many reasons. One is that people are not believed many times. And so why would you say something if you're not going to be believed? Mm-hmm. And there are often repercussions. The person who was a survivor may be moved, and the person who perpetrated the violence may stay in the unit.
Yeah, from the Independent Review Commission that I think will be brought up later this evening, the stats are since 2010 to 2021, 65,000 women reported military sexual assault, and 69,000 men reported sexual assault. And I think what surprises me is there's actually more men that have reported sexual assault just by the numbers. So it's important to consider that men are also survivors of sexual assault in the military.
Yeah, and related to that, the military is about 20% female, so that helps understand those overall numbers. I know in my practice, every week I see a man who has experienced MST, and I see many women. So this is definitely a very common, unfortunate experience.
I think a lot of people don't want to come forward because of the shame and the feeling like it might be their fault in some ways. And also in the military, fear of maybe losing their career. If they come forward, they might, have to face going to court and that whole process, and maybe just feeling like staying silent would allow them to keep their career.
I think another thing unique to the military, I'm not a veteran, so the veterans could speak to this more, but when this happens, it's like incest, because these are your brothers, your sisters. Women perpetrate violence, sexual violence, as well as men. And it's pretty hard to confront one of those, someone who's like your family member. 80% of the time, we know the person that has sexually assaulted us. And so it's definitely not just a stranger in a dark alley that you don't know. That's a very small number of sexual assaults.
Yeah, I think oftentimes the sexual assault survivors are junior enlisted, new people to the military, people who are alone, the only woman in their command group, and they, feel maybe isolated and so that I think it puts people at risk. The power dynamic of someone who's junior with maybe a person in higher rank above them puts people at risk additionally for military sexual assault.
Yeah, and as we've been, go ahead, Jeanette.
I was just going to say, and then also sometimes when people do come forward about experiencing MST, they don't have the support, not just within the command, but they also don't have the support when it comes to also other women, because people don't want to attach themselves to the troublemaker, someone who's going to bring the command down and stuff. And these are things that I have heard, in my roles with the VA and as a veteran.
In April, we talked about end-of-life planning. End-of-life planning is another one of those topics that's not very easy to talk about, but another one we should be talking about.
Yeah, and the important thing, I think the important message of this show is that you have people in your community who are here to help.
Let's take a look. How about connecting with the VA healthcare system?
Absolutely. So that's my next question. After, do you have a DD-214? Are you enrolled in the VA healthcare system, and do you know what type of support is offered there? And seeing veterans with advanced disease and how much it takes to be able to navigate through this time in your life. To be enrolled in the VA healthcare system, I've seen it makes a tremendous amount of difference. First of all, in addition to having any other type of healthcare, if you are enrolled, you have that additional support as a veteran through your primary care office. You have, I know we're going to go more into detail about the types of benefits that are available when you are enrolled in the VA healthcare system, but I've seen it day in and day out, the difference that it makes.
How about you, Morgan? If you got a couple of minutes to talk to a veteran about very important things, and we probably covered most of them, hopefully, but if we left something out, let us know.
No, I mean, I do this on a consistent basis with veterans, especially our older veterans, unfortunately, our Vietnam veterans in particular. Honestly, many of them have felt abandoned, and so they don't know what they're missing in terms of support for their service. I tell them all the time, listen, we're local county employees that when you come and see us, you're going to come and see a member of your community, a veteran from your community that is here to serve you and your family.
So in May, we talked about choosing your own path to a healthy life, and we talked about really serious issues like self-medicating and self-isolating. What stood out to you, Josh?
This show is really about whole health to me. It was physical health, so we had Team Red, White, and Blue there. We had emotional health. We had people that were mental health specialists. We had nutritionists there from the VA. We talked about exercise. This show is really a proactive show. That was the point of it. Yeah. Definitely want people to see what's out there before they get too far down the road where they have to seek a lot of help. It's like, this is what's here for you now. Take a look at that.
Excellent. Well, let's take a look. We're all Army veterans here, and we've experienced what it means to self-isolate, right? Was there ever a situation, Marlene, where you were self-isolating because you felt that you were being judged for an experience or how you were handling or reacting to an experience that happened to you? And if so, like, what did that feel like, and what helped to bring you out of that?
Most definitely, I self-isolated for a very long time because, I thought I couldn't do anything. I think mostly it was the fact that I couldn't move without 5 feet without, having a seizure. And I think if I came across somebody that was in the same situation, I probably would say, we've all been there, so you're not alone. That's something I really would harp on, because I think that's it, because we're worried about being judged, so we just isolate and not realize that there's a billion other people that have been in the same situation that we have, and to know that you're not alone. Also, you got to try everything once, because you're at the point now where you need to find your new purpose, and once you find that, the dark turns into light.
Steve, what about you? Did you have experiences when you came back and you were dealing with sort of the drop in op tempo where, self-medicating was something that you experienced?
Yes, definitely. Alcohol was the way that I coped with the, anxiety that I'd be feeling. And it helped. It worked for a while until it didn't, and suddenly I would start having more panic attacks, and it's just almost like it wasn't enough, and my body was saying, like, you might want to do something differently. So I it was really hard, and it took time, but eventually it got to the point of not drinking, and also haven't had a drink in over 4 years. And I noticed that my sleep improved dramatically, and that was the biggest thing to helping my mood to stabilize, and I felt regulated, and so I didn't have as much anxiety as well. But I will say, like, there was this point where I had to reach out for more support, because like a lot of my socializing was kind of centered around alcohol as well. And so, finding a community that can be more healthy as well was so important for me.
In June, we talked about toxin exposure. This show had the second most views in the entire year, which completely makes sense to me because the show with the first most views was the PACT Act, and a lot of toxins have to do with the PACT Act. And during the show, I probably learned the most out of any show I did the entire year.
Yeah.
A lot of times I was like, what is Buck saying? So you see Buck's our Assistant County Veteran Service Officer, and I'm so glad that we have SMEs on these shows because I learned a lot.
Yeah, so you mentioned the PACT Act. The PACT Act tells you look out for toxin exposures. This show tells you what are toxin exposures because we didn't all take a class in that, right? So I really enjoyed this show too. I learned so much. I would recommend this show for anyone who has questions about toxic exposure for either themselves or a family member who's in the military.
Let's take a look.
Toxin exposures happened a lot in the military, and they happened over a lot of different eras. So different eras of veterans may have been exposed to different types of toxins, which could potentially lead to presumptive disabilities. So really what we're talking about is toxins that the VA recognizes and what associated disabilities might be related to that type of exposure. And the earliest one that I can think of is ionizing radiation.
Yes.
And this really came into play during the atmospheric nuclear testing in the 1940s. That often happened in the Nevada Proving Grounds. There was the Bikini Islands. There was also underground nuclear testing that happened in Amchitka Island in Alaska in 1974. They found remnants of the contaminants in the water. So the VA does recognize that veterans that were stationed in Alaska before 1974 to be been exposed to ionizing radiation. Also, there were veterans that were assigned as a cleanup crew. Essentially, they tested these nuclear weapons on islands, and beta particle radiation and gamma radiation would have been still a part of those islands during the cleanup crew. So places like Inutiwak Atoll between 1970 and 1980, veterans were deployed there to clean that island up, and they would have been presumed to have been exposed to that type of radiation there as well. A hot button one that we're seeing a lot, in our office right now is questions about Agent Orange and who was exposed to that. And Agent Orange is really consolidated to the Vietnam era, those who were in Vietnam. There were a couple of laws passed in 2019. The Blue Water Navy law expanded that Agent Orange exposure to those that were 12 nautical miles off the coast of Vietnam, which opened up a new class of veterans in the Navy that would have been then recognized with that exposure too.
So that's good to know. Vietnam, but not just boots on the ground, but also in the sea and in the air. What are some of the other areas?
Sure, with the PACT Act, it opened up new places like Thailand, Guam, American Samoa, Johnston Atoll. There's specific time frames that are associated with that. But if you have a question about that, I strongly recommend reaching out to your VSO so we can answer about those time frames of the recognized exposure.
Well, asbestos is a naturally occurring mineral that has several unique properties. It doesn't burn, it has excellent insulation, and it's cheap. As a result, it was used across all branches of service extensively in anything that was fireproof or they didn't want to catch on fire or needed to be thermally insulated. So it was on pipe lagging on every Navy ship or Coast Guard cutter. It was on engine wraps around all different vehicles, tracked, wheeled, rotary wing, and fixed wing aircraft. It was used in brake pads and clutch faces. So it was used extensively. As a result, millions of veterans have been exposed to asbestos over the decades, from the 1940s, the ramp up to World War II, up through the deployments overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan. So millions of veterans have been exposed to asbestos. It most commonly causes disease 20 to 50 years after you've had exposure to the dust and particles. Those dust and particles can enter your body two ways. You can swallow them or you can inhale them and they get into your lungs. The most common diseases that we see are lung diseases, scarring caused by those fibers embedding into scar tissue, into the lung tissue and causing scarring, which affects breathing, causes shortness of breath. So you have asbestosis or calcified pleural plaques. There's also several different cancers that are caused by asbestos. The most common is lung cancer. Mesothelioma cancer is a rare and aggressive cancer that is almost only caused by asbestos, that affects the lining of the lungs and the lining around the abdominal organs. The VA also recognizes that cancers of the urinary tract and digestive tract can be caused by asbestos exposure. So over the last 9 years, I've helped about 2,000 veterans that have been negatively affected by asbestos during their service connect with VSOs and disability compensation claims with the VA.
So in July, we took a look at the 4th of July, but we really wanted to do it from a different angle. So the title of our July show is Independence, Gaining and Maintaining It. And what we're really doing is we're going back through history and all of the wars that America's been involved in, preserving that independence. And we really got to talk to some cool guests on this show.
I would say we got to listen to some cool guests on the
That's
show
true.
because we really got a really brief history of the Revolution, Civil War, World War I, and World War II. I think that's the least any of us talked from the set.
It was.
We just let them talk, and it was like, hey, let's learn.
I agree. I have to admit, I thought this show was going to be a little bit boring, but it turned out to be the complete opposite and really one of our favorite shows, I think. So let's take a look at the clip.
We can really say that Saratoga was one of the most, if not the most important battle that American soldiers had ever fought in American history. Because thanks to the overwhelming victory of the colonial forces over the British Army at Saratoga in New York, actually caused an entire surrender. That inspired the French to join the war. And then later on the Spanish and even the Dutch in later years. So what was supposed to be just a civil war instead turned into a massive world war. And that is what provided the colonists with even the best chance of success.
And then, so of course, going back to Saratoga, that was where Benjamin Franklin was busy in Paris trying to secure French support, but Louis XVI said, I want proof, solid proof that your countrymen could win. And of course, that happened with Saratoga and, that great dramatic battle. And the interesting thing is, of course, who was the leader who won the Battle of Saratoga? We know him, Benedict Arnold.
Yes.
But the thing is, Arnold was able to electrify his men on the battlefield, and his opponent, General John Burgoyne, always makes me laugh because you have a general who goes into the wilderness carrying cases of champagne and going off to fight wearing ruby cufflinks and with his carriage. So
I wish I had a case of champagne when I went off.
You gentlemen have just taught me more in the last 7 minutes than I think I've learned in the last 30 years of life. We just watched a clip from the 1989 film Glory, and we happen to have with us Leon Watkins, who was the flag bearer in that movie. Leon Watkins is the ghost. He's the executive director and founder of the Walking Ghost of Black History. And we have a picture. I'd like to show Mr. Watkins with the flag right there. Pretty amazing. Mr. Watkins, could you tell us what it was like, what the experience was like being part of that large production, all of you in uniforms and, kind of what it felt like to be involved in all that?
Well, first, good afternoon, and I definitely thank you for having me. My experience on the set of Glory was phenomenal. I mean, the first day I stepped on the set and saw just the production value, the world that I knew had ended that day. But luckily, being that it was military and it was a military project, and being a former Marine, I was able to bring that experience. And once being asked to be the flag bearer, the thing that stuck in my mind every day that I held that flag were the men who planted the flag on Iwo Jima.
That has to be an amazing, and it's an amazing scene. And it makes me think, as there was more African Americans in the Civil War than the Revolutionary War. We know that. How do you think that changed the future of history for African Americans in the military?
From what I know and what I understand, towards the end of the Civil War, African Americans also were being considered as not only NCOs, but also officers, to where they spread out the branches of the artillery units, the infantry units, and also the cavalry units. And most notable was the 9th and 10th and the 24th and 25th Infantry, which were named the Buffalo Soldiers. So the Civil War brought in the attitude of, equal rights and equal service, but it still was a long way based on segregation.
In August, we talked about what to do if the VA denied your claim. That is such a deflating experience that I think we've all probably went through. But the real idea behind the show was how to prepare a successful claim. And then if you do get denied, here's what to do, right?
Yeah, I love this show. This is like the nerdy stuff that county veteran service officers dream about, is how can we educate our fellow veterans on how to deal with the VA. And we see so many veterans who come in and they're exhausted from the feeling of having to fight the VA. And we kind of take that apart in this show and we do it step by step. So this is really the playbook. This is the show to watch.
All right, let's educate. Let's take a look at the clip. Karen, let's take that a step further. So you open the letter and you see that you had some claims denied. Immediately, you're thinking, I need to call the VA, I need to do this. What should you do right then?
So one thing that you might want to do, in addition to, as Ben said, taking a close look at that decision letter, is consider reaching out to your local county veteran service office. Every county has one, and they, are there for every veteran in their county to be able to provide them help with this sort of thing. We at Swords to Plowshares work with veterans in San Francisco County and Alameda County on that sort of thing. So you may be able to see if there's another local nonprofit or veterans organization that is nearby that can help you decipher this denial if you're having a hard time figuring it out, or maybe see whether they can help you, actually appeal your claim.
So is there any reason to call the VA right then and say, hey, I was denied, what's going on? What are they going to, are they going to tell you anything different than what's on the letter?
Generally not. There wouldn't be something that the VA hotline would be able to help you with. The only circumstance could be that if you think that they didn't send you the full decision, then you could call them just to ask them to mail out another copy of that decision.
If something was missing, yeah.
So there is 3 main reasons for denials, right? And I believe we're going to have a graphic on the screen. Ben, could you tell us a little bit about the 3 main reasons for denial?
Sure. The first one is going to be, no evidence in service. There's nothing in your service medical records or your personnel records identifying any complaints, exposures, illnesses, or anything like that. The second one is going to be no current clinical diagnosis. And then the third one is going to be there's no tangible evidence leading your current diagnosis back to that thing in service.
Yeah, so the VA decision letter is not going to say it that clearly, right? So let's talk about each of those in a little bit more detail. So no evidence of in-service incident. What's that gonna look like?
So one way that could show up is, let's say that you're, filing a claim for knee pain, but when you were in the service, you were 19, nothing bothered you. You never went to see the medic, because who goes to see the medic? And so you don't have in your service treatment record, on August 5th, Joe Schmo went and saw the medic and got ibuprofen and whatever for his knee. That's not in there. And so the VA, and they're looking through your file, may not see something to point to say, oh, this is where you got your knee injury. That might be evidence that you need to get in a different way to let the VA know that did happen, even though they can't see it off the bat in your service treatment records or your military personnel file.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off what Karen said is, we as veterans, we don't go in, make complaints. However, we'll go off of the knee pain. Now, let's just say your job in the military was a paratrooper. You're logging an extensive amount of jumps. A very common known disability would be knees, hips, backs, feet. That could be another strategic angle that Karen was just talking about.
Yeah, really good point.
Or even maybe you complain to your mom, your girlfriend, your friend that, hey, I busted my knee and it's been bothering me for weeks. your friend could write a letter saying, hey, yes, I remember him hurting his knee and that it bothered him. And that would be another way to show VA that you actually did get that knee injury however many years back, even though you didn't go to the doctor for it.
Is that what's commonly referred to as a buddy statement?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That makes sense. So you said there's no evidence in your file. Does that evidence actually have to be you went to see the doc, or could it be at the end of your, you're processing out, you do your final physical, and you just check a box, knee pain, but you never really went and saw anybody? Would that count? Because there's no like diagnosis, but would that be something that
they would utilize? They would cover that in the narrative. Another, and Josh, you brought up a very important topic is 1 year post separation, the VA can consider that time presumptive, knowing that when serving active duty, we don't go to sick call.
So I just want to chime in that presumptive means that you don't have to prove that your knee pain today was caused by your injury that you remarked on your exit physical, that the VA just assumes it. Past that time, you have to show the VA that that's that same knee injury acting up, 5-10 years later.
So in September, we were remembering 9/11, and we wanted to do that in a way that honored our veterans. And so our show, 9/11 Veterans, we had veterans come in and talk about where they were during 9/11.
9/11 is one of those days where if you're over 10 years old, you know what you were doing on 9/11. I think that was the first question we asked everyone. What were you doing on 9/11? It was so unique. I think that we had a veteran that was out and went back in. Mm-hmm. We had a veteran that was in command of Marines and they were about to graduate from Marine Corps Recruit Depot. And we had a Marine that was in training at that time. It was such a unique show and a good way for us to remember 9/11 and the sacrifices that came after that, definitely.
Yeah, it was really cool to see those different perspectives. So let's take a look at that clip now.
So kind of a training theme here. I was the executive officer. I was a newly promoted captain. I was stationed at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot where we train at the time, we would train the male recruits from the Western United States. MCRD, as we called it, Marine Corps Recruit Depot, is co-located with the San Diego Airport. So there's an active runway mere feet from where you're actually conducting training. And of course, the field training, everything else will be conducted there at Camp Pendleton, about 60 miles to the north. So we're at an airport, obviously. And when the towers fell, I was on duty, actually, so I was there early in the morning. Everything went silent a couple of hours later once we realized that this was not an accident or an aviation mishap. This was a terrorist attack. This base, which is basically a museum, it's pretty much, or was at the time, open to the public, was suddenly fortified. We had armed patrols, and we were doing things that you just don't see or didn't see at the time. Then, of course, we were graduating a class that week, so we had 700 recruits that we were planning to graduate that Friday. And that graduation ceremony it's a big deal. You're talking bands, dress blues, guests of honor. Jim Webb, former Secretary of the Navy, was scheduled to be our guest of honor for that, but everything changed. The air went silent, which is very rare at that place. It's very eerie to not hear aircraft right next to an international airport. And then so we kind of prepared for the future, knowing that there was going to be a response. We knew that America would respond, and we knew we'd be part of that. Specifically, our recruits who were graduating, becoming Marines that Friday, would be entering a totally different world. A totally different world, and their service would be probably radically different from what they'd prepared for. So off to war they went, and then the rest of us were trying to find a way to get in the fight ourselves.
For you, Dan, why is it important to keep the memory and history of 9/11 alive for the next generation?
So that people remember that, like what Mike was saying, we have to remain vigilant. We have to always remain on guard, because even when we're feeling safe and secure, leading up to that, we had no sign that anything of that magnitude could ever happen. And I believe it's probably because we weren't vigilant. We let our guard down, and And that was a real slap in the face. And I really feel like we need to learn a lesson that if we're not prepared, something like that, and I'm afraid of it too, can happen again. And so generations have to learn that the world is not as sometimes we want it to be. And there are people out there who do not like our way of life.
In October, we brought on the recruiters. We literally brought on 5 recruiters on the set, and it was so fun to sit there and talk with all of them and talk about the different branches and what each branch has to offer. I felt like I was like in little military candy store kind of. If you went to the military, you've talked to one of these guys in a certain atmosphere, maybe somebody that did it. It was really fun.
Everybody remembers their recruiter. I certainly do. What I love about this show is that you and I come into contact with folks pretty commonly that are asking, should I join the military? Should I not join the military? What's it like? This show answers that question. Mm-hmm. And we really had our younger folks in mind when recording it because we wanted to give them a resource so that they could feel some of these branches out a little bit.
So let's have the viewers take a look and decide what branch they want to join.
I had the opportunity to travel all the world, just like those pictures right there. The one on the left is in Saudi Arabia. The one on the right is in Australia. I got to see the world. I got to go and drive and blow things up, but also meet foreign countries and make a lot of good friends all around the world. As long as, just like that picture right there on the far right, that's me and my wife at one of our seminars. This is for a staff sergeant. Through every rank in the Marine Corps, we go through like different seminars for leadership, for our MOS credibility, different things like that. So going through different billets as a driver, as a section leader, or a crew chief, or as acting platoon sergeants, taking charge of about 30 to up to 40, 50 different Marines and our vehicles. And then that leading to recruiting. I did recruiting before. I was here from 2019 to 2021 here in the Contra Costa area. Left for 2.5 years, went back with AAVs, which led me, back here.
It would be the easiest to recruit for and the hardest at the same time. You have folks that come in there and say, I want to be a Marine. You're like, cool, good to go. Here's your MOS. And some that, if they don't really want to, then maybe this is not the branch for you. You got to want to be a Marine. You can't really talk somebody into that.
Yes, sir.
Does that sound accurate?
Yes, sir.
When I think of modern and recruiting, I think of social media. So do you all have social media accounts through your recruit station
Yes, sir. Yes,
that
sir.
now you use, and you have to get that stuff approved by comms and all? We saw the commercials, which are amazing, but it makes me think how many people between the 16 to 23 when you joined, maybe a little bit older than the rest, are sitting in front of TV watching live TV. So that maybe isn't, but you can show those on TikTok, I think it's called. TikTok,
yes, sir.
Instagram. So do you guys have those you do live feeds where you're
Yes,
doing
sir.
pull-ups in the park on Saturday? You're by a plane, you're by a ship, you're jumping you're doing something crazy. Using those tools, is that something like, okay, now I have to learn how to operate, TikTok or Instagram? How does that work for you all? Anyone?
So for me, it's typically just like, I already have my personal Instagram. So it's me just having a second account essentially, right? And really that's what it is. And so I'm able to go ahead and highlight what Air Force is doing, do some cool stuff and be able to do that. And yes, be part, right next to the aircraft and kind of show something where normally someone can't actually be a part of, or at least just not yet. And so this way it gives you a better idea of based off what I'm telling you. Now you can put the picture behind the words of what you're able to go ahead and do yourself based off something on my Instagram or the reels that I've been able to go ahead and put, or even just be part of the trend. And everyone can at least see that, all right, it's not just a military branch. We have some fun too. So
Right.
this way you can go ahead and see a part of that world.
I think one of you mentioned that before, that now it actually
meet the
it kind of vets what you're telling them. They can go in there and search for, any branch, any job, and say, yeah, this is kind of more of the day in the life of it. This is what it's like on the ship. It's not it's exactly what the recruiter said, or it's nothing like what the recruiter said. Hopefully that's not the case. And I think that the use of social media definitely could help the military. I told you all before we started, when I joined my recruitment, what I could watch was Full Metal Jacket. I know there's definitely something wrong with somebody that watching Full Metal Jacket and say, let me join the Marines. So I'm glad you're able to showcase other things. You mentioned the movies, I think. but you can show other stuff besides how we're just portrayed in some movie, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the movies are movies, but in real life, we're still human, right? We still get to do the regular things that we do on a daily basis. Just because we put a uniform on, that doesn't mean we're different or any different from other people. It's just it's a matter of us going together and actually participating in things. And so social media definitely is gonna shed a light on what's going on in the military branch.
Yeah, like how he mentioned he has a separate recruiting account. Like, so me personally, I keep my personal account as my recruiting account. We also have a RSS Concord page, but like how they said, it sheds light on we're humans. My biggest thing on my Instagram is I'm true to who I am.
In November, we talked about Port Chicago, and this was my absolute favorite show. This is local history. This is American history. This is veterans history. I absolutely love this show.
What amazed me about this show is that there was 80 years ago, 300 military members killed 10 miles away from here. And not a lot of people around here even knew that happened. So our goal was to make sure that their memory lives on, and the community they understand what happened. They know what happened. And I think we did that pretty well on this show.
Let's take a look.
Which is unfortunately going to bring us to the night of July 17th, 1944. Out at the pier, we have two ships. On the land side, we have the E.A. Bryan. It's almost completely full. It's getting ready to set sail soon. On the water side of the pier is the Quinault Victory. This is a brand new ship. She is on her maiden voyage. She had just stopped in Martinez to be refueled, and she's arrived, and they're going to be loading her that night. In between the two ships on the pier are 16 rail cars filled with ammunition waiting to be loaded. And then at 10:18, something happens. We don't know exactly what, but within 6 seconds of each other, there are two explosions. The E.A. Bryan is virtually obliterated. The Quinault Victory is ripped in half and flung 500 feet off the coast, rotated 180 degrees and flipped upside down. The pieces of metal we see here are most likely from the Quinault Victory. Debris is flung as high as 2 miles up in the air. The explosion registers as a 3.4 on the Richter scale in Berkeley. Windows in San Francisco are broken, and the blast can be felt as far away as Boulder City, Nevada.
The massive explosion at Port Chicago was only the beginning of a story that would span over 80 years and challenge our treatment of Black Americans in the military. Let's return to Port Chicago and hear Ranger Hillary describe the aftermath of that deadly day.
And then it's going to come August 9th, not long after the explosion. These men are going to be ordered back to work. They're going to be marched out of the barracks and down towards the docks. And they realize they are going back to loading ammunition again. In those couple of weeks, everything had changed. Well, nothing had changed, because they're not given additional training. They're not told any safety procedures. They're still not given gloves. Everything is exactly as it was before the explosion. And when they realize where they're going, they stop and they'll say no. They say that they are willing to obey any other order except the order to load ammunition. But they are afraid of handling ammunition. And that's 258 sailors who do this. And so the Navy will put them on a prison barge for 3 days, and they are made to think about the consequences of their actions. They're called cowards. They're told that their family members will be ashamed of them, and they're threatened with death by firing squad. After those 3 days, 208 of those sailors will say, okay, we'll go back to work. They will be docked 3 months' pay and given dishonorable discharges. The remaining 50 are going to be known as the Port Chicago 50, and they are put on trial for mutiny.
The story did not end with the so-called mutiny of the Port Chicago 50. Many people fought for decades to clear the names of these brave men who sacrificed so much in the name of justice and change. Let's return again to Port Chicago to hear from Ranger Hillary.
In 1999, President Clinton reaches out to 3 of the remaining Port Chicago 50, and we think that they are the last of the Port Chicago 50. And he offers them the opportunity for a presidential pardon. Now, the issue with a presidential pardon is in order to accept it, you have to admit guilt. Now, 2 of these 3 men said no. What they did was not, they did nothing wrong. They simply said no. They wanted safer working conditions. Their understanding of a mutiny would be that it's a violent takeover of a base or of a ship at high seas. They didn't do that. They just said, let us be safe. The 3rd man, Freddie Meeks, says, yes, I'll take it. Not because he doesn't think that what they did was wrong, but he appreciates that President Clinton is helping to shine a light on the story, to bring it to the forefront. In 2009, we become an official part of the Park Service. We are actually President Obama's very first park that he establishes. But until that point, the Port Chicago 50 were still labeled as mutineers. And they continue to be so labeled until this past July. On July 17th, 2024, 80 years after the explosion, the Secretary of the Navy exonerated all 258 sailors.
We hope you enjoyed a recap, Veterans Voices 2024. I hope you learned a lot. I certainly did. How about you, Elena?
I did too.
Please join us in 2025, but we'll have 12 great shows again.
We hope you've enjoyed a look at some of the best conversations we had in 2024. We leave you with a way to watch all of our shows if you want to see more. Just follow the QR code to find us on all our social media and our complete archive of shows on our YouTube channel. Veterans Voices is brought to you in part by contributions from the Diablo Valley Veterans Foundation, dedicated to helping veterans near you, American Legion Post 246, honoring the tradition of the American Legion in Danville. And if you'd like to sponsor Veterans Voices, you can donate to Veterans Voices care of Diablo Valley Veterans Foundation. Get in touch with them at diabloveterans.org. To rewatch tonight's episode, check back on our homepage later this week or check your cable provider's schedule for rebroadcast times. You can also rewatch this episode and many others on our YouTube channel, Veterans Voices of Contra Costa, so be sure to subscribe. Just follow the QR code to find us on all our social media. Our next show will air Wednesday, January 10th at noon. You won't want to miss it. To all our veterans and their families, thank you for serving. To all of you who tuned in tonight, thanks for watching and have a great evening.